Welcome to the Modern Hippie podcast, where we'll be exploring all of my favorite boundary-pushing people and topics surrounding consciousness, psychedelics, mental performance, functional medicine, living in alignment, and so much more. I'm your host, Barrett Perlman, a former pro wakeboarder turned body worker, energy healer, and well, a modern hippie. And I'm so glad you're here. Welcome back to the Modern Hippie podcast. I am joined today by Ariel Clark, who is a founding partner lawyer at Clark Howell and one of the founders of the Psychedelics Bar Association. So thank you so much for joining me today, Ariel.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, you and I met at Remind, which was a psychedelics business conference, part of the marijuana business conference. And I heard you give a presentation, I heard you speak, and was just like, who is this badass babe of a lawyer that I think I need as part of my team? And got to know you a little bit, and it's all true. And so I would just love to riff with you on like, how did you get started on this journey with psychedelics and self-exploration? Yeah, let's start there.
Yeah, thank you. I love that as a starting point, the origin story.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the best way for me to describe my entry point on this path is to talk about my lineages. We have, all of us have many different types of lineages. And so I'll identify a few. I am mixed race. I'm half Odawa or full. I mean, it's, as mixed people, it's such a funny and interesting space to hold because we are both. And so I am half French American and half Odawa Anishinaabe. And yeah, my tribe is in the Great Lakes area. I was raised in Michigan. Although I went around in a light blue VW bus for a number of years. And so I had a very non-traditional upbringing. And, really people that I was raised around were sort of, in a lot of ways, on the fringes of society on multiple fronts. Native people, but also, queer people, political radicals, you know, refugees seeking political asylum. I grew up around a lot of sort of people who cared about people and saw a lot of inequities in systems, and had my own path of challenges. A lot of, I think it's well known, but there is the historical trauma and intergenerational trauma was something that really, I suffered from immensely for a solid 22 years of a lot of difficulties. And so, so the step onto the path was sort of part of that process, that transformational process. And my first really deeply healing experience from medicine, and I will say in Anishinaabe-Moan, which is the Anishinaabe language, the word for medicine is mushkiki, which is actually translated as strength of the earth. And so the first medicine experience I had was like, that was really deeply, that was maybe 7 or 8 years ago or so, but just walking in the woods and crying and really kind of going into sort of a hibernation period with myself for a few weeks to really feel a lot of things, and had a really deep experience. And then, it was the plants and the trees that saved me. And I love the plants and the trees, and all of this, despite all of the really suffering and oppression and, harm that we are still, really working through. Um, yeah, so that's how I stepped onto this path.
Wow. I actually didn't even know that about you. And I thank you for sharing that story with me. I have so many questions. Like, did you grow up knowing your tribe? Was that part of your upbringing? Other than, like, I know you mentioned all of the interesting characters who cared so much, but did that include your tribe? Hmm.
So, we have in this country nearly what 530 years of settler colonization. And it's really astounding to look at the history of laws and, starting from sort of this
Hmm.
doctrine of discovery that has justified, this is globally justified really European colonization of so many places and people. And, over those hundreds of years, there have been all sorts of other laws, laws really grounded in genocide and taking of land and, you know, taking of people's humanity. And, you know, for,
Hmm.
there's, a lot I could say, but it's really astounding to see all the ways in which this government has really, has treated the people that are indigenous to this land. And, part of that story involves the story of taking Native kids to boarding schools. Both of my grandparents were in those horrible places. Um,
Hmm.
and, then the further sort of ways of stripping people of their culture and identity and religion. Native people were not allowed to, they were persecuted until 1978, um, to, practicing religion and religious and cultural practices. And, at these boarding schools, kids were not allowed to speak their language or practice their cultural beliefs or, and then there was rampant abuse. I mean,
Hmm.
just horrible. And, as we know, all of this, the epigenetic story is deep, for 500 years of
Yeah.
colonization and epigenetically kind of what happens to our bodies really, like what happened to my body. uh,
Hmm.
that, yeah. So, um, but and then there were these other stories of like, child protective services taking away native kids and adopting them out and just all sorts of things. So, and a lot, and it what, being indigenous was not cool. I mean, I'm 45. When I was
Hmm.
young in Michigan, it was not cool to be indigenous. Even though I'm white passing, I still dealt with, some really a couple really ugly experiences from white kids, in that I knew growing up, and things that they would say. And, it wasn't okay for, certainly not okay for my father and my uncles and my uncle and my aunts and other folks to be Indian, And so things have changed a lot, which is great. I'm
Mhm.
so grateful, there's such a resurgence. But when I was young, things were different. And there was uh, a lot of sadness and sorrow and grief, and that looked like a lot of drug addiction and alcoholism throughout my family. So, people were not available
Mm.
very much, in the ways that when they are in a place of, I would say it's sorrow, but you could say
Mhm.
addiction, or something like that. So, I grew up, with a fractured connection to my tribe and my community, and had other native people from my same tribe or other tribes that I met, especially in my childhood, that, kind of took me under their wing. and over the course, of of that harder time. Um, but what's very beautiful is that, part of the story of healing is the lineage healing, and so it's like I get to
Mm.
really now live and walk a path of, you know, I call it the red road in Anishinaabe. Bamatazuin is like the living a good way, and there are these other teachings that I have the, like, such a privilege to, like, reconnect with myself, and my community.
Mhm.
And so it's all just part of the story, like our stories are circuitous routes. So,
Yeah. Wow, I think you make a really great point as well about honoring, your path can be so affected by everyone around you because they're on their path. And if the people around you are on a path of self-destruction and not in a place to be able to support you emotionally as you're growing and having your own struggles, well, it certainly leaves you very alone and having
mhm.
to figure that out for yourself. And for my listeners who aren't familiar with epigenetics, what does that mean, and how has that been imprinted on you?
Yeah, so there was a thought for, I think, a long time, certainly again when I was young, that, you know, our gene expression didn't change quickly, that it was over the course of many, many generations. Um, and and actually when I learned about epigenetics, I breathed a deep sigh of relief because I spent a
Mm,
long, long time, especially when I was in that darkness, just berating myself for, like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I be okay? Why can't I feel okay? Why can't I, you know, just this literally the grief that I literally felt like I was, like, born with. It wasn't a thing that arose at some point.
mhm,
Um, and then other things, why can't I just be okay? And then, learning about epigenetics, which is basically like in the preceding generation, our mother and grandmother, our father and grandfather, that literally experiences in their life in all respects, but we can just maybe look at trauma, that it's expressed in the subsequent generation, like literally right then from mother to child. And you see these, so it's, I almost think about it like it's like a ricocheting of experiences. And
mm,
also is, the idea of 7 generations before and 7 generations in the future, and the, like, where we are at, you know in terms of all of our relations, really not just being our relations that are on this physical plane now, but our
mhm,
relations that have been and still are, because they are our ancestors and they're with us, and the
mm,
ones that come before us, who are also here because their lives are made of the stuff of our decisions as well. I was born,
mhm,
you were born into a world where the subsequent generations and choices and forces and all of the things that I couldn't possibly understand with this limited human mind, they all create the container that we live in and all the systems that we live in, you know? And so,
mhm.
yeah, it's really amazing to learn about epigenetics, and for me, just really feeling a sense of, like, truly liberation from self-hatred and shame, that
Mm.
continues with, like, the work of understanding, you know, all of the systems of oppression. And, kind of, it's a lot of what I think about, because I'm on the quest for liberation for us all, and, like, true homecoming, you know.
Ah, seriously, and I think that's so, now that I know your origin story so beautifully, it ties into exactly what you do have committed your life to, which is helping free people from oppression, and helping liberate the medicines that allow for that healing as well. And so, where then you had your first big experience and almost like a walkabout, it sounds like. What's the term for it in your tribe?
Well, I just was mentioning I mentioned the word, like what medicine is. Medicine means strength of the earth.
Mm,
And, I think, especially, it's a good thing for people to put in the front of their minds, especially who are newer to working with psychedelics or plant medicines, sacred medicines, is like, I think you and I talked about recently, 99% of it really needs to be integration, the preparation and
mhm.
integration. And this small percent is the actual experience, because when we walk out of that experience, it's really the ceremony of life begins,
Yeah.
and living our lives as we are in ceremony and in prayer and in the sacred, in really all moments. Um,
Mhm.
and so, this connection, this really, it's interspecies communication. This the connection that we can have to plants and medicines, to the strength of the earth. All we have to do is walk outside, or me look at the tree, or close my eyes and hold all of the beautiful, like, connections that I have had in so many moments with our mother, our earth,
Mm.
like that. She gives us such abundance, and gives, even though, look at how we treat her. We are in this river of life, all of us together, and it's in danger. you
Yeah.
know and yeah, so just really, I love that the translation for medicine is the strength of the earth, because
Mm,
it's an orientation of humility.
mm,
Like, that's one of the, like, I still am split on psychedelics and, like, plant
mhm,
medicines. My heart, where my orientation is, like, plant medicine, sacred, or mushkiki, right? Because of that orientation. But
mhm,
then you have psychedelics, that's a term that's used sort of so much. It can be more encompassing because it maybe includes synthetics and this, that, and the other. But for me, it lacks the grounded earth orientation, and is about mind and consciousness expansion. And I just feel, and I see over and over again, even though I've literally, law reform, being a lawyer, reading a million things, using the mind is like literally what I've been doing for a long time. Over and over, it's like,
yeah,
wow, we really, even, and I am a better lawyer, and a better, you know, more deeply in service person within this ecosystems and the ecosystems that I work within, when I come from a heart place, when I'm aware of when I'm
mm,
embodied, you know?
mhm.
And so, yeah, I like plant medicines better than, like, psychedelics, but what can you do? It's what we're using.
Yeah, I think you raise a really great point, and something that's come up in discussion for me a lot recently too, is like explaining to people what the difference is between plant medicines and psychedelics. And I'm like, okay, it's kind of like a square and a rectangle. Like the plant medicines are the square, and psychedelics are like the rectangle, and like a square is a rectangle by definition, but not all rectangles are squares. And so the beautiful plant medicines with their beautiful intelligence infused into them, and that deeper connection with the plants, or in the case of natural medicines, the animal, there's something really intelligent that works its way through, and they do get lumped in with the overall overarching psychedelics category, which also includes the MDMA, the LSD, the ketamine, which are great medicines as a tool for what they're being used for, but incredibly different. And what do you? When did that term? When did they start getting lumped together? Do you know?
Well, I can say this, so me, my law partner, about 6 other lawyers came together about 3 years ago and started the Psychedelic Bar Association, but we didn't have a
Mm,
name at first. And so we went through really beautiful, deep process work. We worked, Kat Konauer, who is one of the founders and authors of the North Star Pledge and the North Star
Mm,
Principles, and I highly recommend people looking at those, and the sort of morality tale, we will call it Paula. Um,
yeah.
Basically, a lot of that thought was around how, given what we've seen in cannabis, and how the process of commercialization and commodification, when you have something that's illegal or unregulated, then it goes through these systems. What did we see in cannabis? Oh, largely harmful outcomes that nobody loves. I mean, maybe the
Mm.
much larger corporations or
Yeah.
venture backed, multi-state operators. But
Hmm.
anyway, but there's more to that. What is almost lost on an interrelational ethical level when we go through that process of legalization and commodification. And so these principles, the North Star principles in that organization, has really, you know, looks at how can we do this in a way that hopefully creates less harm, and in fact is, a more healed way of legalizing and regulating and forming companies and all the things that we do, because we're people and we create systems and laws and all of that. But how can we
Hmm.
do it in a way that's deeply value based? Anyway, so that's, we founded the Bar Association based on those values and principles, which I'm tremendously proud of, the work uh, that we continue to do. But as part of that
Hmm.
process, we spent like a year and just the founding board members going through an internal process. And it was like, okay, should we call it psychedelics? Should we call it plant medicine? Should we call it, what about just drugs? I mean, psychedelic exceptionalism is problematic as well. Like, and
Mm.
we went back and forth, and oh, believe me, so much process, and sort of ended up with, well, okay, psychedelics is more broadly understood. It feels like it will create a wider tent, which is what, we want, lawyers, all sorts of lawyers, corporate lawyers who maybe haven't sat down to, think about, let's say, spiritual or religious use, or whatever it is, just for, and vice versa, just all lawyers to come together and work with these principles and work together on substantive legal issues. And we thought, well, psychedelics is more broad, but I still think about it a lot. So anyway.
Yeah, and okay, so I love also that your experience in the marijuana industry has carried through into this industry. Oh, and before I forget, I have signed that pledge, the North Star
Nice.
Pledge. So
Yes.
I
Yes.
am guiding all of my principles based on, yeah, acting ethically and carrying the knowledge and passing on the history and giving thanks to those who've carried it before us. And highly suggest it for anyone else who is in the psychedelics industry, plant medicine industry, natural medicines. The beautiful principles. So tell me how did you what made you want to become a lawyer? Let's go back a little to some
Mm,
more origin.
sure. Yeah. Um, well, okay, it's strange because, like, I didn't know a single lawyer growing up. I mean, I
Huh?
remember on the bookshelf there were books by Vine Deloria, who's an amazing Native American attorney and activist, and just
Mm.
a prolific writer as well. And I remember seeing the book God is Red and Custer Died for Your Sins, and being very, like, interested in them at the age of like 8. Like, I don't know, but
Oh wow.
um yeah, I mean, and I drew a picture of myself as weirdly a judge, which I think is very funny, when I was maybe like around the same age, maybe even like 7. Like, I don't know what that was about, but
Oh my gosh.
I did. I do want to say this. When
Hmm.
I was in the jungle in Peru about a year ago. I was dieting, and the first night
Mm.
before the dieta had started, and you're in your tambo and there's literally no walls. and there's just a mosquito net,
Oh
and
boy.
a tiger came into my tambo, or probably a jaguar. That was the first thing. But then the second thing is, it's okay though. I didn't get eaten. But the second thing
Okay.
is I had
Oh,
this
like a tiger
beautiful
in the physical realms or a tiger in the
into
astral realm? Oh
into
shit.
my tambo. Oh yeah. Oh really?
Seriously
I know
dangerous.
that's a really that's like a notch on the wall of like I'm hardcore.
You're fucking really hardcore.
I know.
Colton.
I really thought I was gonna die, but one of many times, you know. But anyway,
Wait, how
yeah.
did
So
that
that
pan
happened.
out? Wait, how did that pan out?
Great. Oh well, they went around and smelled into my bags, and then came around next to my bed and breathed right next to me, which I just acted like I was dead. And then thank the Lord, a person, you know, there were people who were kind of like walking through the property, just who, you know, lived on the property just to make sure everything was safe. And actually, two of them walked down the path, and then the jaguar ran away. So
Oh
that
my god.
happened.
Well,
Yeah,
you
I
can also
know.
look at it as like a beautiful blessing for your
I
journey.
totally do. I absolutely do. I mean,
Shit.
I'm, yeah, like the biggest gift, you know? And then afterward, I had this medicine dream where literally, like, I was in an indigenous, you know, basic something like a courtroom. And so
Mm.
um I wasn't the judge though. But I was I was there presenting, I was talking about basically there's a whole movement, and I didn't even know that much about this movement, but there's a whole movement internationally that is, you know, within the indigenous community as well, around the rights
Mm.
of the earth, you know,
Ah.
and you know, different ways to indigenize the law. Yeah, really, totally. I know, like as like
Mm.
so that the earth, so nature, so rivers, you know, would have basically human rights or the equivalent of personhood
Yeah.
status, you know. And can you imagine, like, if that were true today? And that's happening. Ecuador
Mm.
incorporated the rights of nature into their constitution, you know. Other I know.
I'm getting
Yeah, so
goosebumps,
there's
like
a lot
crazy
of, I
goosebumps.
know. Yeah, I mean, really, like the rights of nature, I'm obsessed with, like, it's everything, or rights of earth. Yeah, it's the best. So
Yeah.
anyway, so
I
yeah,
mean, to
I
think
mean,
we give
and that
corporations, we give pieces of shit corporations
that's
more
right.
status than, like, the lake that everyone loves to enjoy and play
A
on, than the
hundred
fucking ocean,
percent.
like, Jesus
Mhm.
Christ, it's about gosh darn time. That's
Yeah, yeah,
it's
totally. So our law firm, we do like business, corporate, and regulatory work, and then we do a lot of other stuff. But like I I know from, you know, corporate law and seeing the
mm,
life cycle of corporations and businesses, and just knowing the law, you know, itself. And it's you know, there is such a distortion of how companies are running in this particular country, more so than in a lot of other countries. The US is just so hyper profit driven only focused, no
mm,
matter how that profit is made, no matter how it impacts the earth. I mean, the fact that, like, you know, 90% I think of our water in this country, like fresh water, is in the Great Lakes region.
oh,
Meanwhile, yeah, yeah. So and meanwhile, there's this corporation called Enbridge that was given a permit essentially from the state of Minnesota to build these oil tar pit lines, which is hurting the water. I mean, there's already been so much pollution in the Great Lakes, and then it disrupts ecosystems. And, you know,
mhm,
and that the fact that that is happening to our like the precious water, and yet those kinds of permits and you know, the legal, under the law, legal destruction of land and resources at this ecological inflection point, notwithstanding like a whole different, you know, an indigenous viewpoint, which is like, we are in
mm,
kinship, these are my relatives. And, you know, but even just, you want to
yeah,
put it in a fully Western lens, that the law sanctions that among so much else. It's literally it's devastating. It's mind-boggling, really. But then there are these seeds of hope, where like these
Mm.
seeds of change, of like the rights of nature. And so
Mm.
um, there's actually a group of um, folks, native led, who are um, suing the state of Minnesota because for violating the rights of, in particular, the sacred rice called Monoman, whose ecosystem is being horribly disrupted by this, by this company, Enbridge. And yeah, so I think often, how can we bring these different values, just like the values from the
Mhm.
Psychedelic Bar Association, values, or these like really ethical, interrelational, loving, wise, all of these qualities, how can we bring these
Mhm.
values into systems so that maybe we can have some systemic healing as well, so that's really why I
Mm.
became a lawyer, is to like change things, protect people, protect the plants, like all of that.
Yeah, the world needs more of you, that's for sure.
Mhm.
And I think
Well,
it's
thank God there are amazing humans who are also walking this path, and other lawyers. I'm deeply, deeply grateful, Yeah,
yeah.
but yeah, more, yes.
More, always more. That's my general motto. And so how have you seen the psychedelic renaissance basically compared to the marijuana movement? Marijuana reform and drug policy reform feels like it took a long time from the 90s up until where we are now. And it seems like psychedelics is moving really fast. How how would you kind of compare, contrast the two?
Yeah, I mean, I had a very front row seat to cannabis, specifically in California. I went to law school
Mm.
at Berkeley, and at the time I was working at California Indian Legal Services, which is a nonprofit like Indian rights law firm, and I worked there after law school for a while too.
Cool.
But I was also in community with people who were sort of involved in the underground cannabis ecosystem, and
Mm.
that was back in the day. That's like 2004, 2005, 2006. And that was even before, anyway, I could nerd out on all the layers of law and all the things. But the point of all of this is to say it was a different time. You know,
Mm.
we, cannabis and people involved in cannabis were demonized, or you're losers, or criminals, like whatever kind of it was a derogatory relationship that the mainstream had with people and the
Mm.
cannabis plant, to say the least. I mean, and that was still, there was still this belief, I guess. I mean, there still is somehow, but that the war on drugs was legit, and wasn't really like a war on people. And so, it was a different like framework, it was a different time, it was a different, and it's funny because I remember people saying, like, and like basically, you know, anti cannabis folks saying, "Oh, it's going to be a gateway drug," and like I kind of laugh because it's sort of like has been when it comes to like broader society. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, it was, and now it's like, oh my God, holy shit, the sky didn't fall when we legalized cannabis. In fact, what happened in California is like you really see like how, wow, government mismanagement and bureaucracy and taxes, and how much like if you're not really careful and you choose to treat a plant basically like plutonium,
Mm.
so to regulate it so that there is such a limited bandwidth of access, so now in
Mhm.
California, the vast majority of the market is the unregulated market. That means the
Mhm.
quota is, you know, technically illegal market under state law, non-licensed commercial market. But people are going to those places because the taxes and the regulations and everything, and people are going to find a way to access what they want to access at a cheaper price point because life, potential recession, all the things, whatever, you know?
Mhm.
So yeah, it was there, you know, there's a lot that we have learned. I've certainly learned a tremendous amount, you know, and there are a lot of us who learned a lot, you know,
Yeah.
and, you know, there was a lot at stake with cannabis and there still is. I would say in a lot of ways, not to, you know, put things into this, you know, kind of more and less, but I would say, you know, there is a good argument to be made for there being a lot more at stake when it comes to, you know, the broad thing we call psychedelics, you know.
Mm.
So,
And how so?
um,
Like in
you know,
at
psych
stake in what way?
yeah, yeah, psychedelics are so, first of all, we're talking about all these different plants, fungi, synthetic analogs, compounds, right? So it's, you know,
Mhm.
different issues apply to different of these medicines, technologies. But we can say that all of these issues are tremendously like like a lot of intersectional issues arise around
Mm.
healthcare, health access, affordability, you know,
Mhm.
capitalism, commodification, government regulation, indigenous peoples' rights and rights to you know cultural knowledge and
Yeah.
appropriation and biopiracy and I mean, I could go on, you know, it's a drug policy reform. I mean, it's like, and so I often think about all of these issues in or as if they are like stakeholders sitting around a table, you know, because like rather than sort of like a pyramid of government and regulation are at the top or this thing, no, my thing is the most important. It's like, all right,
Mhm.
believe me, everybody's has their own idea of what's the most important thing, but I'm curious about the table and like what happens if we practice listening to what the other very important thing of the other person is, you know, and really
Mm.
listen from a place of openness.
Mhm.
And as we at the same time carry what we feel is very important. And we have these conversations around law reform because otherwise, you know, it'll be what we also learned in cannabis and what we see in so many aspects of law and society, which is people are just left out. You know, those people
Mm.
who have power within the system, particularly within this plutocracy, you know, are the ones that will govern. They will decide sort of the outcomes on the other side. And again, you know, with cannabis, we saw what happens when we just crank the same wheel. Okay, let's just do it the same way,
Mm.
same thing again. Do we really want to
Right.
do that? No. And now we're talking about technologies and medicines that, as you mentioned, you know, come from lineages of people who from all over the world, from indigenous people all over the world, you know, who have and continue to deal with, you know, erasure, oppression, violence, land taking, all the things. And then you replicate this same taking colonialist way of being. I mean, the trauma that that will create for all of us is like, and that's just one of many issues to really deeply think and consider, you know, and we need a really mature approach, you know, again,
Mhm.
at a time of such, you know, mental health, spiritual health, ecological crisis. Like we really, in this country, this obsession with almost like the young and, you know, this is good and bad and, you know, just this way of like a lot of kind of like ego and we just need to,
Mm.
you know, I mean, at least I feel like we really need to move into like those places of wisdom that allow us to really be in process around all of these complicated things that no one's supposed to know the answer to. We're supposed to be in process and figuring it out together, in the river together, at the table together, in that circle, in circle process, in really embodied circle restorative, process. Yeah.
Do you find that a challenge to get the politicians and the lawmakers to be like embodied in the room?
Wow. Well, that's so through the Psychedelic Bar Association, we start every meeting with a meditation or some, just
Ooh.
box breathing, some sort of, get into our parasympathetic nervous system.
Mhm.
Because particularly with lawyers, I mean, lawyers, and I'll tell you, even in the Psychedelic Bar Association, and even this lawyer, um, you know, we are trained to be right, whatever that means.
Mm,
We are
mhm.
trained, like, there's this story that's told that the laws are somehow objective, which is not true. I mean,
Mm.
obviously, but still, that's a mythology within, so I'm just bringing forward the qualities of lawyers. It's like objectivity, rightness, needing to know with the brain, needing to say what's going to happen in the future, all of these like things that almost create a constriction because we
Yeah.
write the laws. And so we want boxes. And
Mhm.
so, having an organization founded on value set. I mean, we do have a mission statement, and the 6 committees are doing deeply substantive work. I mean, it's amazing on religious use and corporate law and intellectual property
Mm.
and litigation regulation and ethics and all sorts of cool things. But founding starting from within, as from the North Star Pledge and principles, and focusing really so much on process and that embodied process. So we've created that container. And oh, it's uncomfortable for lawyers, and it was uncomfortable for me for quite a while at first, because it was like, oh, what are people going to think, because there are other lawyers. But it was like, nope, we do this,
Mm.
and it's been so beautiful because actually, um yeah, it's for so many reasons. For so many, I mean, it really creates an openness to talking about these complex issues. And um, I haven't, I haven't been through that process with anyone who's working on implementation in an agency. For example, when I was, meeting with certain representatives within the Oregon Health Authority last year over issues around religious and ceremonial use, we didn't start it in an embodied way because I didn't, I'm not sure, how to ask for that in that kind of setting,
Mm.
but
Right.
that's needed. This federal task force that was formed, my colleague Roman Hayford, who's the chair of the ethics committee and on the board, he said, um, that task force needs embodied facilitation, really. And we really do.
Mm.
I mean, we need that in all, to come from this place. And that's, part of the wisdom, I think, that's very much emerging, in part because of, this movement, this this movement that's, kind of, I'm thinking even outside of, psychedelics, just the kind of
Yeah.
well-being and coming home to ourselves and.
Mm.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a technique that sounds like it would work well across any industry in any situation to start a meeting just by dropping into your bodies. I mean, even something as simple as all coming together and before the meeting starts, taking a deep breath in and just sighing it out together. And
Mm,
taking that time to pause and acknowledge each other from a place of
yeah,
respect and desire to work together. What a
yeah,
difference that could make, just that simple
yeah,
quick little
that's right.
tidbit.
Yeah, and it
Mm,
does. I mean, the amazing thing is it does. It is that actually, like, is a revolutionary act on multiple dimensions. It really is it's because it's slowing
mm.
down. Like, the revolution is in going slow. That's kind of my thought.
I like that. One of my friends has a good quote he introduced to our ceremony that we keep using, which is, slow is smooth and smooth is fast.
Yes, that's right.
And you can kind of, we had a sloth enter our ceremony house this last retreat for me in Peru, and the sloth came through and it was going real slow on the railings and
Yeah.
climbing through the ceremony house. And we were again got to be like, my maestro was like, see how the sloth moves slowly, and by moving slowly he gets where he's going actually surprisingly quickly. That's how we're going to be in ceremony.
Mm.
But just a wonderful observation for life as well, and something I try to take into my business practice is like, okay, just it doesn't have to all be done at once. Just go slowly, go smoothly, and it will get done quickly.
Yeah.
Um, and so, what's the status of psychedelics now? So, Oregon is legal now as of the first of the year for what? Colorado voted legal. What's the difference? Let's dive into that.
Sure. Yeah, totally. So Oregon passed two measures in 2022. One was, these were voter passed initiatives. One was decriminalization of all drugs for personal use, and a focus on
Mm,
basically establishing kind of more substance abuse and support centers around all of that. And then the other bill was a very limited. So if we think about also, I like circle analogies, paradigms of access, different ways that people access psychedelics. So there's like
mm,
personal use of psychedelics, ceremonial, religious, communal. Maybe those are all one thing, depends on who you're talking to. Medical,
mhm,
therapeutic, festival culture, like all these ways that we
mm,
actually access psychedelics, right?
yeah.
So what Oregon did was they have a very limited paradigm of use model. Um, it is essentially just applies to psilocybin and
Mm,
allows adults. So you don't have to be a medical patient or get any sort of recommendation from a therapist or a doctor, but adults. It's kind of an adult supported use law. So adults can go to a facilitation center and work with a trained facilitator. They don't have to be, someone who has other licensing. And in fact, there's, potentially complications around some of that. Um,
mm,
and they do a preparation session, the administration session, and then the integration session. And so you can't go to a shop and buy mushrooms. You can't go
mm.
to the facilitation center and take it home, but the use is within a very prescribed set of rules.
Oh, interesting.
And yeah, and so as of January 1st, applications for the different license types are available. You know, maybe last I looked, maybe 15 applications had been submitted.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
Yeah, and so, the state will need to evaluate the applications and then, issue the licenses and, they still have to work with the local jurisdictions. A number of local jurisdictions in Oregon opted out of the law essentially in the
Mhm,
most recent election. And so people who are going through the licensing process have to, have authorization from the local jurisdiction. And so, it's like anything. It's implementation takes time, and it feels like, oh, it's happening slowly, but it's also happening very quickly.
mm.
Um, so that's Oregon. You want me to go
Yeah,
into Colorado?
let's do it.
Okay. Um, so so Colorado's law, the Natural Medicine Health Act, I think it's easiest to describe as if it has two components. One is a decriminalization for personal use, possession, social sharing. Within this context, the sort of, it, it it at least hopes to protect sort of the underground, um, community and other
Mhm,
types of sort of personal social community use. Um, and so that helps, that covers certain access paradigms of access. And then the other half of the law is the kind of regulated licensing part of the law. So similar to Oregon in that, they're licensed healing centers and folks that are trained
Mm.
by the state um, to facilitate those sessions. And it applies to psilocybin only for the first, I think, first couple years, and then the
Oh.
advisory board that will be working on all of these issues with regard to psychedelics in Colorado will look and see whether or not to also basically create a similar regulated structure for mescaline, excluding Lophophora williamsi, which is the scientific name for peyote, um,
Mm.
and DMT and iboga. And so, right now, as of the signing of the law, the governor's signing of the law, those medicines are also legal for personal possession and use, and this, and within this kind of, that first sort of bucket of what what the law did. And just yesterday, it was a big deal. The For at least those of us who are involved in this, the governor appointed the advisory board. And, now we will see the whole like long slog of implementation where basically, I mean, but it's like super important because we learn from cannabis that there are things that the law specifically says will be protected, or things that
Mhm.
are promised in, the process to get the law passed, and on the other side, interest groups, certain of them
Mm.
have a lot of power, and things can get gutted, things that were like, wait a second, we supported this law because, you said that these things that we care about would be protected. And then you have huge interest groups that, or whatever it may be,
Yeah.
whatever the happens in that unfolding where, you know, important elements are lost basically. So yeah, it's a big deal.
Yeah,
you know.
it's very important who's on that panel.
Hmm. Yep.
Um, and
Yep.
so, okay, so what I'm hearing in terms of similarities between the states is that decriminalization for possession for most plant medicines, psychedelics, but yet still not access to purchase those
Well,
exactly, and psilocybin
yeah.
and retreat centers.
Well, so that's Colorado and Oregon. There are no other states. Well, so there were about a dozen states in 2023. That includes California, Montana, New York, Connecticut, I think, maybe Virginia, that all filed legislation that relates to psychedelics, as of, January 1st of this year.
Mhm.
Um, and but they look different, so like New York has two bills, but remember how I talked about Colorado being one, like, one, two elements in one bill. New York has a
Mhm.
bill that's just very limited medical use, only
Mm.
for, of psilocybin for residents of the state of New York who also have doctor authorization and administered by healthcare professionals only. Very, very medicalized bill. That's one thing
Yeah.
that's happening. And then a whole other is much more like, you know, what I was mentioning about personal use, social sharing, protecting religious use and community use, you know,
Mhm.
creating a broader accessibility. And, I really, I these two things, there's a conversation within the community about a conflict between medical and therapeutic, and this sort of,
Mm.
you know, broad, like, decriminalization, sharing, communal, ceremonial kind of use. And they really, we've got to really think about it like that round table where all the different ways of accessing, we need to meet people where they are. For some people, they want to go and can afford to go to work with someone. The early estimates on what it would cost people to access the Oregon psilocybin program, a person, is between $700 and $2,000.
Oof.
And a lot of people cannot afford that. Most people
Mhm.
cannot afford that, you know and
Mhm.
so, yeah, so there is certainly an importance within different law reform efforts to be very, 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 very aware of and diligent to ensure
Yeah.
that, these healing ways are affordable for real. and accessible
Right,
for
right.
real and culturally appropriate for real, and I
Mhm,
am concerned about the way that some of these bills look, and working groups and states that are really just honing in only on the medical and therapeutic. Yes, that we absolutely 100% yes. And also, you know,
mhm,
it's like this sort of exclusionary,
mm.
adversarial on both sides, on all sides, it's like, so I'm very, very curious about the places where we all belong in every way.
Right, because yeah, it seems to just perpetuate that idea of keeping the minority classes down, right? By
Yeah,
denying the access to those who traditionally socioeconomically can't afford
totally.
it. And,
Totally. I mean, it's nuts, especially when we know what's happening, in this country and across the globe, how much, like, now we actually understand how trauma works in the body, how these systems of
mm,
oppression have impacted our, bodies and continue to mental health, spiritual, all the things, physical health.
mhm,
And so it literally is unconscionable that
yeah,
any law would be passed at this point that doesn't put that the healing for those communities literally at the center stage, That's
mm,
like what it is, a lack of awareness because of coming from places of entitlement. And so I guess that's on the giving people the benefit of the doubt end, and on the other end it's, and maybe it's both, but it's white supremacy and continued colonial attitudes and ways of being, and this just really, like, yeah, just narrow oppressive ways. So
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and to take a step back and to drop into our bodies and to show up differently, what a different world that would be to acknowledge that those who have walked in white privilege don't know what they don't know, and to
Mhm.
show up with some more humility and a desire to learn, a desire to explore, a desire to understand that
Mhm.
which they don't know, and
Mhm.
in doing so that we can uplift each other,
Yeah.
because to tie
Yeah.
back to the earth being the mother that gives in such abundance, well, we have all formed from this earth, and that makes us all brothers and sisters and all one. And so what good is my success or your success if we're not also uplifting the people next to us, regardless of
Mm.
status, regardless of what they do for a living and where they're
That's
at?
right.
Like,
That's right.
yeah, let's lift and love each other. I'm here for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the systems need changing, you know?
Mm,
Like, we need major, systems change. And also, like, as you say, we are people, we all come from the earth. We all have lineages. We all there once was a time before computers and all of these things. There once was a time when we were all deeply connected to the earth. There once was even a time when,
mm,
patriarchy wasn't basically the main thing on the menu, for example, or one of the main
right.
things. There were
Yeah.
these other times.
Right. I'm even
Mhm.
reading a book about it now called The Island of Sea Women,
Oh,
about
wow.
this
That's cool.
seafaring nation off the coast of Japan, and right at the time when like Japan took over in their region, and but these women were actually free divers, and so they would
Mm.
go out, and it was a matriarchal society where the women went out and free dove in the ocean and would collect clams and oysters and things to bring back to sell to make most of the money for their homes, and the men stayed back with the children and kept the house. And it's a really interesting read about both freediving and matriarchal societies in a Japanese culture.
Wow. Mm,
Something of interest. But yeah, there's so many different ways that we've existed in so many more powerful ways.
mm,
There was a movie I saw recently actually called The Woman King, starring Viola Davis, if I have that correct. And I watched it twice. It was so powerful. It was about this African community, and they they valued women and men so highly that the women actually were their strongest warriors in their military and were renowned throughout the region as being these like savage slayers, and they were badasses, complete badasses. But also they believed that a man and woman should rule the community together as king, because they represent both parts of the duality of human existence. And yeah, it was really beautiful to watch this one particular character become crowned the woman king alongside the king.
Mm,
And they weren't even like partners, they weren't lovers, so it was like someone he elected as
mm.
being wise. And yeah, there's just
Wow.
like so many ways we could do something different and just get outside the box and start to look at all the ways we can color outside the lines. I had a
Mm-hmm.
brilliant art lesson yesterday from a phenomenal artist, and part of what he taught me was like to just even start with free flowing, just like not trying to make anything, but just put the crayon to the paper and like make stuff, and then open your eyes and smudge it all together, and then start to think about drawing like a face on top of it. And I was like, this is so backwards, but so brilliant. And yeah, like in what ways can we get people out of our the boxes? What's a good way that you like to get people embodied or thinking differently?
You know, I the breathing is a big one, you know, just closing our
Mm-hmm.
eyes and into like where we are, our bodies, and kind of tuning in, you know. That's been a big
Mm-hmm.
one that my incredible law partner Nicole Howell, and like friend, best friend, partner, soulmate across a lifetime, she has really brought in into my life and into, you know, the work that we do in the bar association, is really just that the the diligent practice of turning again
Mm.
the moment to ourselves, to our body, you know, through the breath and through the inward gaze. So
Mm.
that, and I've been thinking about that a lot actually, you know, how to invite, because I think a lot about these different cultural lenses, you know, as a mixed person walking in, you know, being part of, you know, two cultures, ontologies, epistemologies,
Mhm.
um, you know, and because these things, these sometimes I call it and think about it like a Western lens and an indigenous lens, because psychedelics, again, here's another example, that intersection is happening, you know, that
Mm.
coming into contact with that convergence is happening. And so I think I've been thinking a lot about how to bridge the cultural and ontological, you know, differences, basically, how to
Mhm.
come to what some scholars call the ethical space or the third space, or this other place where both ways of being and knowing are equally respected and exist. And what is it that we find, like you had mentioned a bit ago about like what can we imagine, you know, I the exercise of what would a healed system look like, what would, you know,
Mm.
legalization and regulation of these various psychedelics look like, really just imagine outside of all of the boxes, what is that, I love that type of thought experiment is so important, and is something that I do in the policy reform work that I, you know, that I spend so much of my time thinking about and working on, you know, is that because the systems, you know, we need things to look different, we need beautiful, you know, things like the rights of nature, and you know,
Mm.
other the third space, the other ways, the ethical ways, you know. So
Yeah.
yeah, and like how to
Mm.
do that, and that's right, like that invitation at the beginning of like, okay, let's connect with our bodies, you know, I think is a
Mhm.
really helpful entry point. But I'm learning, you know. I mean, yeah, I'll I'll yeah, I'll know more as I keep on the path, because I'll be having more of those
Yeah.
conversations. So, yeah.
Yeah. I learned another brilliant technique yesterday that I never thought to sit deeply in and explore, but something that my friend called channeling. And it was
Mm,
like we sat down and closed our eyes and took a deep breath and immediately just started freeballing ideas and concepts that came into our mind. So like if you took something like what would like a healed society look like, or what would healthcare look like if we actually cared about the health of the people? And it
mm,
might look like really truly listening to what's wrong inside their bodies,
mm,
understanding what's going on in their exact geographic location that could be impacting their health. It could look like, what medicines can we help them with that have been through as minimal processing as possible,
mm,
to naturally heal them from the inside out. It could look like love. It could look like, and just to like spitball any idea. There's no wrong ideas, and just write them all down or record it and write them all down later to go back and be like, okay, these were the things that came up when we just listed out things that felt good to us about that idea. And
mm,
maybe how do we circle back through and figure out where the policy reforms can come from with those things in mind?
mm, mhm.
Just to
Yeah.
think it out loud.
Mhm. Yeah. Mhm.
Gosh. And
Free
so
flow.
where do you,
Sorry.
oh, good.
I was just thinking of what you just said is like this like free flow connection, like source and higher self and or through
Mhm.
those, and that's such a beautiful practice. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
cool.
And stay focused on, I mean, one of my paths is helping people like unlock themselves, unlock who they are, unlock their creative abilities, their
Mm,
mental cognition, their awareness of the unified field and how they exist, and their awareness in their own bodies. And I think psychedelics and plant medicine specifically are a beautiful way of opening that door and having that conversation with yourself and where you exist in relation to the universe, and how you are the universe. Shit, you are love, you are light. And yeah, where do you see psychedelics kind of going from here, to use the broad term again?
yeah. Hmm. Well, we will certainly see what we create again.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like that's the thing that I now from, being someone who's been through a process of, really substantial and right on the very tip of the spear, cutting edge, of law reform with cannabis, specifically. You really see that kind of like a really good science fiction or futuristic realism book that shows you like it's almost a mirror to who we are, what we
Mm,
create within systems, what is our, even some books, will even kind of theorize about like what is human nature, and do we
mm,
do we is it our forever tendency within our makeup to seek hierarchies, like Octavia Butler has said in one of her books. I think that was in Kindred. I've read so many. I love her.
mhm,
But yeah, that we human beings just create, systems of hierarchy, and and that coupled with our intelligence is what basically creates all of these kind of harms and oppression.
mhm.
Anyway, so it will be an opportunity to look in the mirror once again. And like what will we do, and I see a lot of people who care a lot, and who are really really going to so beautifully, so many people, from all different backgrounds, going to the edges of their comfortability and going into the places of discomfort, to
Mm,
and really are informed by these medicines and practices and ways, not everybody, of course, there's going to be a whole, and there is, a whole host of people who are, will carry that, hyper capitalism, destroy anything
Mm.
else at all costs. Yet I'm going to wrap it up in
Yeah.
CPG packaging and market it and tell this story of how cool I am and how cool my influencers are and how great this product is. And, do that same rodeo again, and that will happen.
Mhm.
But a lot of other things are happening, and a lot of people are very committed to, I mean, really, that's work that I get to do and our firm gets to do with people is really, helping people design company structures, um, you know, you know, organize their business, finances, governance, financial practices in ways, in values driven ways, in ways that really, operationalize those values, that consider
Mhm.
all the stakeholders, that really, implement actionably, what people in the psychedelics ecosystem know as indigenous reciprocity, but is, really more
Mm.
accurately, benefit sharing is what the Nagoya Protocol says, but benefit honoring is
Mm.
something that my spiritual uncle Troy talks about, who's Comanche. So, it's people care about that, people care about that
Mhm.
within this ecosystem. And so I think we're going to see a lot of really beautiful, like, ways, in within how people work together. I hope,
Mhm.
I think, I see him, so
Yeah.
I'm holding that prayer real deeply and like working toward that way with
Mhm.
people.
And speaking of benefit sharing, you have shared with me a website that I believe I might mess this up. Is it grow.org?
Oh, grow medicine. Yeah, maybe
Grow
it's grow medicine.
medicine.
Yeah.
Org. And you shared with me something, a practice that I am going to start developing as well. That every time you sit with the medicine, you go and you make a donation to growmedicine.org, who helps redistribute it back out. And please correct me if I'm messing this up, but they help redistribute some of that back out to the indigenous cultures that have carried it. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, sure. So, um, the Indigenous Medicine Conservation Fund, so Grow Medicine is sort of under or in collaboration with the Indigenous Medicine Conservation Fund. And that's important because that fund is Indigenous led. And so a big
Mm.
part of, for Indigenous people, you know, one thing, and I of course don't speak for, I only am just speaking for myself and what I learn and hear and read and all the things. But there and through, understanding sort of concerns and what people want within the Indigenous community through different gatherings that have been happening for years around this issue, but specifically, concern within Indigenous communities about psychedelic capitalism and how
Yeah.
that is impacting their communities, their cultural knowledge, their land, their medicines. And so, issues around conservation, for example, of
Hmm.
Lophofora williamsi, of issues of conservation around toad and iboga. And, you know, that's something that, people really care about, and other things. And so it's very
Hmm.
important in these really that kind of cross-cultural dialogue and work that we really have to do together, in that listening place, in that true like place of collaboration, where all ways of knowing are equal and seen. The different ways of knowing and being are equal and seen. Um,
Hmm.
that indigenous people, indigenous leaders, indigenous medicine carriers really need to drive or lead, these conversations, rather than and where money is going and all of that. So that's why I mentioned, grow medicine is so cool, because it's a way where, someone, a person, they're like, okay, I see that, I recognize I'm in relationship with this medicine. And this medicine has also been held by communities for thousands of years. And I'm now benefiting from that. And,
Mm.
the level of poverty amongst Indigenous people worldwide is stunning. The continued oppression and taking of land and resources and all, I mean, it continues to this day. Colonization is not something that happened, it's something that continues to happen. And so when people wake up to this recognition of, wow, I'm in this relationship, I'm being given these benefits, healing, physical healing, spiritual healing, financial benefits in terms of companies that are engaged in this, whether you're getting a license from Oregon, or, you're developing some sort of, analog, um, of one of these medicines,
Mhm.
you're deriving benefit from people who have held and continue to hold the land where this knowledge and these resources come from. And that we need in this country and in Western culture for our own really healing is learning learning about right relationship and relationality. So it's one of many ways to engage with and to have us to acknowledge. Land acknowledgments
Mhm.
are beautiful in that way. All the other ways, to um other ways that people can engage, individually. We work with companies that are on that journey. And yeah, so anyway, so yeah, there are really cool organizations that are in place that create vehicles for this type of benefit honoring and benefit sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I will have them linked up in the show notes in case
cool.
anyone would also like to make a donation and show your gratitude for the lineages that have carried our beautiful medicines. And how else can my listeners keep up with you? How can they stay informed? What's the best way?
Well, I'm one of those strange people that's not really on social media. Um, so, but I do have LinkedIn, and I do post some bulletins that I write, or they could go to our website and sign up for bulletins. I only send once a month
Mhm.
at the most, so nobody's going to get a lot of stuff. Um, but yeah, I guess I'm not really sure all the time what to say to that one.
Well, I'll have your website linked up
Okay,
so people can go there, sign up for your email list. And if
cool.
anyone is in need of psychedelics law, you are who I work with and have been so grateful for your guidance and your sisterhood thus far. And excited to keep walking this path with you and deeply honor your journey and what you've been through to get here, what you've healed and overcome so that you can help others heal and overcome themselves. Uh, thank you. Thank you for all that you do.
I appreciate you saying that, and same,
Mm.
same. Thank you for walking your path as you walk it.
Thank you. And I'll go ahead and call it. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and review this podcast wherever you're listening. I'm so grateful to have you on this journey with me. Until next time.